You're listening to Black Like Me with Dr. Alex G., a podcast that invites you to experience the world through the perspective of one black man, one conversation, one story, or even one rant at a time. Here's Dr. G.
Hey, everyone. Welcome to Black Like Me with Dr. Alex G. And I'm excited to be offering you yet another exciting episode of our podcast. First of all, let me just say, I appreciate all the love that we're being shown across America and across the world. And I thank people. You all must be sharing it or reposting it or doing something because, the UK is just really tuning in. And so we're almost as popular as the royal wedding last weekend. And I love that. I'm sure the royal couple is even listening. And so I just want to say that, Prince Harry, Princess Markle, thank you so much for listening in. I've got an exciting segment today. For the entire month of June, as you know, I'm focusing on the benefits of fatherhood. I love fatherhood. It's one of my greatest things in life. It's my passion. It's what I wrote about and studied about in graduate school. It's what I preach about. It's what I lecture about. And oftentimes we talk about fatherhood with such sadness, and we look at the examples of fatherlessness, and that needs to be looked at and addressed. But we almost do that at the expense of looking at good fathers and good fathering. And so for the entire month of June, we're talking about that. We're showing examples of good fathers. We're having men talk about how their fathers influenced them and how it's influenced their own fatherhood. And so today I'm going to be interviewing a friend who I've recently reconnected with, and his name is Scott Jackson. Scott is the president of Global Impact, and it's an organization that grows global philanthropy. It helps to create workplace solutions for being able to give and act philanthropically for great missions serving children and families around the world. His organization is responsible for raising about $1.8 billion. And I really, really appreciate their work. I met Scott probably 18 years ago. He worked for another organization, and we were taking a trip to the Holy Land. We were going to Israel. We wanted to take a look at some of the philanthropic work that his organization was doing there. And Scott and I ended up sitting across from each other. The aisle separated us, and it was a long, long flight. I think at this point it had been the longest flight I'd ever been on. And so many of you who know me, you know that I'm a recovering class clown. And so I just like to mess with people. And so Scott is this likable white gentleman. He's sitting across from me, and I just lean over and just say, I've got to make the time work. And I just say, hey, Scott, you got any black people in your family, or do you know any black people? Just like out the blue. And Scott looks at me very seriously and says, yeah, my father. And now at that point, I would have just rolled in the aisles because I did not expect this white gentleman to say, yes, his father, although his last name is Jackson. So that should have been a clue. But he started telling me a little bit about his story that has now become the subject of his book, Take Me With You. But he actually laid this out for me as we were on this 15-hour flight. And I was enthralled by it. In fact, so much so that when I was sitting with my team here in the Black Like Me podcast studio, I said, I want to look at unique examples of fatherhood or just some different examples of it. And I said to my team, there's this guy named Scott who I met one time. And through mutual connections, later that day, I was given Scott's contact information. I sent him a text within the hour, I believe it was, or the same day. He wrote me back and said, hey, Alex, it's great to reconnect. And so I'm going to be talking with him today about his story, his book, his insights about fatherhood. But I am really, really honored to be reconnected with you. Scott, welcome to Black Like Me.
Well, thank you, Alex, and what a joy it is to not only reconnect with you but to be part of the podcast. And it's fantastic what you're doing because I think it's so important to cover these issues and to share with each other.
Oh, well, man, it's great. I can't wait to find an excuse or reason to get to D.C. because I would really love to connect with you in person. And, a little bit later, I'm going to be, having you talk a little bit about global impact in that work. But one of the things that we do, Scott, on Black Like Me is that we open up with these icebreakers. And so I have a set of questions that I ask my Black guests because it's called Black Icebreaker. And then I have something that I ask my white guests because it's called like, hey, what in the world are white people doing or thinking? And it's all meant to be tongue in cheek. But because your last name is Jackson and you're raised by a Black man, I'm going to ask you the Black questions, Scott. So
sounds good.
And these are just fun. They're just meant to just help us relax. I'm just curious, growing up, was your preference grits, or if you had to choose, would it be grits or oatmeal?
It was definitely oatmeal.
I grew up, my grandmother was the oatmeal lady, so I grew up actually eating both of them. Let me ask you this, Scott. Have you ever had a haircut by a Black barber?
Yes. Jefferson used to give me a crew cut.
I had a feeling you were going to say. That's why I put that question on for you. Now, was that your choice or was that his choice? Because every Black father thinks he can cut hair. So I'm glad that he didn't pull any punches with you. Did you ever like those crew cuts?
He not only thought he could cut hair, he had a whole bag of hair cutting,
Oh, those clips?
Yep, all the clips. For
every occasion.
Everything.
Did he put designs in your hair?
Yeah, he cut it once, and we never really tried again.
Well, I'm glad you got one. That welcome to the club. You got that one. Hey, Scott, do you know what a church mother is?
Oh yeah, absolutely. and they have to have a really fantastic hat.
They have to. That's part of the uniform. Do you know what a lap handkerchief is used for in church by church mothers? You ever see a church mother use a lap handkerchief?
I'm not sure I have.
Some of those, they would have these ornate handkerchiefs they'd have on their lap. One to keep their sweaty hands from making their white dresses dirty, but the other just in case their their skirts were slightly above the knee. They would put a lap handkerchief on their legs so they wouldn't be tempting to the men in the pulpit. But a lot of Black churches, if you think back, you probably realize, oh, I just thought that was just what she weighed when my dad was preaching. That was like old standard gear for church mothers.
Listen, when you're the only white kid in an all-Black church, you're just scared to death of a church mother. You're not thinking about her handkerchief.
You know what? Scott? That's a good answer. Hey, what's your favorite soul food item?
Well, I don't know if you'd call this soul food, but I love black-eyed peas.
No, that's soul food, brother. That's about as soul as food can get. Got you.
And cornbread. I'd go black-eyed peas and cornbread.
Now, the only thing that would make that blacker, Scott, is if you ate them with your fingers without a fork. 'Cause that's how the old Black folks used to do it. But black-eyed peas, did you put vinegar on them? Did you put hot sauce on them? Did you put? I used to put sugar on my black-eyed peas as a kid. I don't now, but I used to. Did you put anything on them?
I love it with sugar, but with greens, lots of greens.
Yes, it took me a while to start mixing those together with my greens. But as a kid, for whatever reason, I like the sugar on the black-eyed peas. My wife still does that a little bit, but the cornbread does send it over. Have you ever sung before or after a sermon that you've delivered?
Absolutely. In fact, during the book tour, Rich Stearns, president of World Vision, he said, "Are you going to sing after this speech about your book?" And so I sang, "I wonder, do you love the Lord?"
I love that. And last question, it's not important that you ever ate them, but have you ever come in contact with chitlins?
Oh yeah, absolutely. in many countries, actually.
Oh my goodness.
So I've had chitlins, of course, here. In Oklahoma, where Jefferson was from, and Kansas and Missouri, but I've also had them in Scotland, and I've had them in New Zealand.
Oh my goodness! Do you remember what they're called in Scotland?
Haggis.
Our mutual friend, he's passed on now, but Steve Hayner used to talk to me about that. And as soon as you said the name, I remembered it. Yeah, so. Listen, Scott, you got one up on me, man, because I have not eaten chitlins in like 40 years, and that memory was so disturbing. Not only was I upset, not only did I need bicarbonate of soda, but I needed therapy. after those. So you got one up on me. Not only have you eaten chitlins here, but around the world. That's, you know what? I think you've done well with the icebreaker, Scott. I think we can move into the next to the next segment. Man, thanks for being such a good sport. I do that with every guest. So thank you. Different questions, but thank you. Okay, so during the introduction, Scott, I talked about this great organization you're serving. Let's just take just a few seconds to talk about global impact. I really would like to spend the bulk of our time just talking about fatherhood, but I love to promote what each of my guests is up to. We put a link to their website inside of our podcast notes because you're doing great things, and we want people who are in my circles of influence to find out more about it. But just how long have you been the CEO of Global Impact?
I've been here for 6 years.
Wow. And just tell us a little bit about what you do. So you help organizations, workplaces, design ways for their employees to give to great philanthropic efforts, to act philanthropically towards great humanitarian efforts. Is that sort of the short version of what you do? You help to raise money to support these worthwhile efforts?
Yes, and more broadly, we were formed 62 years ago to be the international United Way, so to represent...
That's exactly what I thought about.
Save the Children, World Vision, CARE, and large workplace campaigns. More broadly, our work is about building partnerships and resources for the world's most vulnerable. And so we do that not just in the workplace, but more broadly, we're doing marketing and fundraising campaigns around the world. So, for example, this week, as we're taping this, will be the week of Red Nose Day with NBC, doing something funny for money, which will raise $40 million for really important causes around children getting out of poverty here in the United States and around the world. And we're the U.S. coordinator for Red Nose Day. So that's the kind of thing that we get involved with.
That's fantastic. And just knowing a little bit about your background and how you've served and worked with organizations like World Vision, it's not surprising that you're doing something like this. And so I'm really proud of you and the work that you're doing. But again, it's not surprising. This is just another platform for you to live out what you're really about. So, Scott.
Thank you.
Oh, no, my pleasure. Do you remember the plane ride that I'm talking about? We sat across the aisle from each other. You probably don't remember my initial question, just messing with you, asking do you have anybody black in your family?
And I remember you were a little bit shocked.
I was really shocked. I'm not used to someone, having that comeuppance on me. So I was surprised that you did that. But I was just really intrigued by the story, and not only by the story, Scott, but that you chose to share it with me because we didn't know each other really well. You were helping to coordinate this trip. There are probably about 14 of us who are pastors who are going to see some of the work that was happening in Palestine. And so we were hanging, I noticed that everybody was, ribbing you, that everyone liked to have fun with Scott. So I think that's why I felt it was okay to, to kind of tease you and mess with you. But when you mentioned to me that you were raised by a black father and then you went back and told the story, and I want you to do it in your own words, but what I remember was that your mom had remarried because your biological father was physically abusive. I did not remember that he was a pastor. I didn't remember that part at all. And I don't remember the part that he and your stepfather, Reverend Jefferson Jackson, had served as co-chairs on some type of racial healing council or racial reconciliation council. So I didn't realize that they were peers and knew each other. But you did tell me that you ran away from your biological father because you were not able to live with your mother because she was white, and at this point had married her pastor. Was encouraged to go to get some counseling, got counseling from Pastor Jackson. They ended up falling in love, getting married. He lost his church. She lost her job as a teacher. You all escaped before a court date to Vancouver, and then from there you were extradited back to rural Kansas and ran away. I think the first time in a snow blizzard in Kansas. Man, you know what? If I had known all of that, I wouldn't have messed with you on that plane. I wouldn't have messed with you, man. That's just the beginning of the story. I mean, do I have most of those details right about how we got to this point, or what do I need to have you fill in for me just to get us to the beginning of your story?
Of course. And just to add, just to a great overview you gave, but in fact, the book that I had the
Right.
fortune to write. It's called "Take Me With You," and my mother would be abused on a regular basis by my biological father, who also was not only a pastor but was writing about race, marriage, and family during the time.
Wow.
Every day when she would try to escape, and sometimes drive her Volkswagen VW Bug down the driveway, I would say before she left, "Take me with you." And ultimately she did and escaped that situation. And then she was encouraged to go see Jefferson Jackson for counseling. It was really much more of a kind of a snide remark, but she did.
Okay.
And they did fall in love, and they finally got married on a weekend in Nebraska because Kansas law didn't change until that year.
That was 68?
1968. So they actually, I was kind of irritated with them. They ran up to Nebraska and got married. But I wasn't as irritated as the rest of the community. So we had cross burning our yard. We had, my mother lost her job. She was the first integrated school teacher of Bonner Springs, Kansas. And the way it worked then was that all of the black kids were brought in with the white kids in the special ed class.
So all the black kids who were integrated were put into special ed?
Correct. So the only integration was a special ed classroom. So she had everybody. And then Jefferson lost his church. So both sides, it was difficult.
So he lost it because of the marriage? Because of the marriage. Was this Jefferson's first marriage, Scott?
No, it was his second marriage.
Okay, I was just curious.
But it was just too much for the congregation. And so then it was interesting. Then there was a custody case because there was such embarrassment, not necessarily because my biological father wanted me to live with him, but because there was such embarrassment. And we were losing the case. In fact, our own attorney said, you folks are going to lose tomorrow, so I don't know what you're going to do, but you're going to lose. And so on the drive back to our little farm where we had a trailer where we lived, Jefferson said, "Well, we're gonna take you with us." And so we planned our trip, and we didn't have a lot of money. We closed the trailer door and left it unlocked, and made our way by plane to Vancouver, British Columbia, one of the most amazing sights I've ever seen, the mountains, the water. We stayed in Vancouver for a little while. We couldn't get work permits, and then made our way down by the ferry system to near a place called Sequim, Washington, to a quiet part of the border crossing. And a gentleman on a ferry, a Canadian gentleman with a felt hat, a feather in his head cap, came up to us. He saw the three of us. Jefferson had given my mother a poodle named Trixie. We were quite a sight with maps in those days, no GPS.
Right.
And he said, "You folks ought to think about this place called Sequim, Washington. You won't be far from there when you land on the ferry, and people from all over the world are retiring and moving there, and they would accept you." And then he walked off.
That was a complete stranger.
I always felt like he was an angel. And sure enough, we got off the ferry and had a hard time getting a taxi in a hotel, better than Kansas.
Right.
But, in all of that, what was interesting looking back is that, Jefferson had a full life. He had a church. He was very well respected. And he gave it all up and then traveled to the Pacific Northwest so that I could have a chance.
Wow. How old was Jefferson when this was going on in '68?
He would have been in his early 50s.
Okay. Wow. And did he have biological children?
No, he never did. In fact, they did a lot of experimentation in the Army on black servicemen.
He was sterilized.
And so we don't know, what they would test different pharmaceutical drugs, but he never knew why he couldn't have children. But my mom and Jefferson adopted 2 children, Jeffy Lou and Sean, and they were mixed race, so it was no problem, getting kids if you wanted mixed race kids. But Sean was a severe asthmatic, and he died at the age of 21. But Jeffy Lou, who's actually legally deaf, is an amazing. She teaches dance for inner city kids in Seattle, and is still the love of my life. So they did have 2 more kids besides me, but none naturally.
Sure. And so, in your story, you gave someone your real name, and your mom was held for contempt of court and for kidnapping, and you were actually extradited. You had to say goodbye to your family. What I couldn't remember, Scott, is how long had you been in Sequim before you were forced to go back to your biological father?
Yes, we hid out on a horse ranch for about a year, and then re-entered me into the school system.
Oh, I didn't know it was that long.
And it was during the second year, and somewhere along the line I'd given my real name to a school administrator without really knowing. But one day the authorities came and got us, and they had come and arrested my mom at the same time at the house. And then held her, as you mentioned, for contempt of court, and then took me back by armed escort to Kansas. But Jefferson and my mom met me at the detention home before I had to be taken away, and they gave me a knit hat. By then, Jefferson was preaching at the local VFW. He was an amazing preacher.
I bet,
he had an 8th grade education, but he could read the Bible word for word. And he, a woman in the VFW church had knitted very quickly a knit green hat with $20 bills all sewn inside it. And then they gave me a Bible with
that was made just for you,
numbers.
Scott? That was made just for you? The hat?
Oh, yeah, that was for me.
Wow.
And so it was a year later in the middle of a snowstorm, and I could see that there was a piece of mail for me, a letter from my mother, but my biological father wouldn't give me any of those letters, and I didn't know she was even still writing. So I tried to grab it, and we fought, and I lost. But then I guess he opened the letter and didn't think it would have any damage, and so he tossed it my way, and it said 3 words, "I love you." And I knew that my own memories of Jefferson and Sydney were fading, and that I had to do something. And so I got my hat, I got my Bible, I took my little bag, and I stuffed my basketball in it, and I threw it out the window and said, "Listen, I'm just going to go out and look at the snowstorm." And then I took off and made my way through rural Kansas, from Lawrence, Kansas to DeSoto, and then there's a whole story of how I eventually got back to Seattle. But
how long did it take to get to Seattle?
In Kansas, he and my biological father were the first co-chairs, as you mentioned, Alex, of the Black and White Ministerial Alliance in 1968.
Wow. The irony of that, Scott. Hey, Scott, how long did it take you to get to Seattle from Lawrence?
It was about a 3-day trip, because the last day I actually got on a plane, which a 12-year-old couldn't do, these days.
Right.
And by then, of course, my mom and Jefferson knew I was on my way, and then arrived in Seattle. They had taken the case to the Supreme Court of the state of Washington and had actually overturned it, but now it was a civil trial, so I actually had to be in that state to have it, be appealed.
Wow.
But I didn't know any of that, so it was definitely a God thing. But Jefferson was so amazing through it all, and of course, then we did win the final court case. And I was finally able to speak to the judge, and I was able to tell him what an amazing father I had in Jefferson Jackson.
Scott, I'm not just saying this just to smoke your way, but this seems like Hallmark movie, like the Hallmark Channel movie stuff. I mean, these are the kinds of things you watch, and so you're a kid on the stand speaking about what your father means to you. It's powerful. Can I just throw a couple questions your way?
Absolutely.
At what point did you feel like Jefferson was your father? Do you remember the moment where you just thought, okay, this is not just my mom's husband, and this is not just the pastor of the church we've been going to. This is not just a nice black man. Because at some point, your name became Jackson. So those are two different things for me. I want to ask that part as well. But do you remember the moment where you just realized, where you just said to yourself, this man is my father?
Yes. No one, you couldn't help but meet Jefferson Jackson and think he wasn't special.
Sure,
I mean, I met him as a very small child in the churches when they would exchange, pastors for sermons.
Right.
And he was just an extraordinary Martin Luther King Jr., Alex G. kind of person. He was someone who brought out an openness in others and had a love for the world. And so he was a good man. Now, did I want my mom to marry, a black man? I mean, okay, here we go. And I didn't feel like I was an angry kid. I mean, I didn't feel like I needed anybody. I didn't need Jefferson. I didn't need
Sure.
Sydney. I was an angry kid.
Sure. How could you not be?
And Jefferson showed love, but he also showed discipline. I mean, he would not let me talk back to my mother. And to this day, without Jefferson, I think my relationship with women would have been different.
That's
because
amazing.
It was generational. It went from one generation to the next. We went sometime after the court case to check on adoption, and it was expensive. I mean, it still is, right, for someone to adopt a child. We didn't have money. Jefferson milked cows. My mother did some substitute teaching and worked at the post office over time. But essentially, what we did find out is you can change your name for $25. So I think one of those moments was when, Jefferson and I by ourselves went to the courthouse and changed my name to Scott Jackson. No middle name, just Scott Jackson. I think another time that I knew the connection we had was that when I graduated from college, I was, first in my class, student body president, and this graduation ceremony speaker, and the class voted and asked for Jefferson and I to give the baccalaureate.
Oh,
and he came over.
Really?
He came over that morning to give the baccalaureate service with me to the University of Puget Sound Chapel, and we did a lot of this. When I was in New Zealand as an exchange student, he accepted my high school diploma. He never had one, but he got mine, and then he was their graduation speaker for many years. But at the baccalaureate for the university, he and Sydney arrived late from Sequim, closer to Seattle where the school was. And of course, I didn't know if they were going to get there on time or not. And then he came up and he handed me this pen, and he said, "This is for you, boy." And it said, "World's greatest son."
Wow. That's powerful. That's powerful.
But we were very close. We were probably closer in spirit than anything else. We could read each other's minds. He had to clean a restaurant at night, and so I would go with him whenever I was home from school. So we had a lot of time together.
I love that aspect of the story, Scott. That's just, so many. It's causing so many thoughts in my head. I can remember my mom trying to explain the reality of racial tension. I grew up in the 60s. I was in kindergarten when Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated. I remember being sent home from school. I remember the west side of Chicago burning down. We lived right in the heart of Chicago, like off Pulaski and Cicero, which is right, like, yeah. And so I could just remember just all the fires up and down Madison Street. But so many African American parents have to talk to their kids and give them the race talk or the reality. Did Reverend Jackson try to avoid that discussion with you? Did he initiate it? I'm curious what he might have had to say to you about race relations, or I'm sure part of what your father was dealing with, your biological father, was not just his own rage and anger, but the idea of a black man raising his child, the embarrassment of all of that. I'm curious, did you and your stepfather, Reverend Jackson, have talks about race and black and white tension during those times?
We did, and you're right. My biological father went on to remarry and have a good career and have a positive impact on the world. So it's a lot bigger than any one of us, these issues.
Sure. Whether
it's domestic violence or race.
Right.
But Jefferson, there were a lot of we were never invited to social events in the community. There was only one other family that would invite us, to Thanksgiving or anything else.
Sure.
And Jefferson always took that in stride. He would just say, you just have to love people through it. But he never didn't stand his ground. He was always firm that he was, a child of God, and he was there, just like anybody else. Mm-hmm. But he also tried to love people through their own anger and their own racism. It came in different ways. He was such an amazing character that no one was really very blatantly racist towards him. It was just things like not inviting us.
Right. Most people aren't very blatant about it.
Exactly. But for me, it was kind of blatant. I mean, fathers would call and tell my mom that unfortunately their daughter wanted to go out with me, but they couldn't because of they wouldn't know what to do if it got serious, and they had an interracial family. So it was kind of crazy how it played out. I probably got some indirect hits, but of course a white kid never experiences what a black kid. I mean, my sister and her husband still to this day, he'll be pulled over on his motorcycle for no reason in Sequim.
Right.
And we have a mural of Jefferson and Sean on the in the town center, and my own brother-in-law gets pulled over because he's black. So we have a long ways to go.
Yeah.
But Jefferson was an amazing model, not just how he talked about race, but how he lived through it.
How he lived through, the character, the faith, that it takes to live through that. The grace is amazing. You mentioned that you spoke up about his ability to be a father to you in court. In social settings, church settings, did you ever have to stand up for him because you're in meetings and people were going off about him being black? I'm curious if you ever had to stand up for him.
Yeah, when they captured me and took me back to Kansas, my biological father said, well, the court wants you to go to counseling because you have a lot of anger. I said, don't you dare take me to a counselor or I'll show you anger. And so he did, of course, took me to the court counselor.
And you showed him anger.
And when we were together, the woman said, well, we really want to work with you because we know it's very hard what you've gone through, and to have a black man as people think that that's your father, and we really want to work through that with you and what you went through, and it must have been a really horrible experience.
What?
And I threw a chair and a table across the room, and I said, listen, you bitch.
Oh, wait, you said that, Scott?
The man out in the waiting room is the one you want to be worried about. And you better get me out of this room, and if I ever have to come back here again, I'm going to take you and him out every single day wherever I go.
And then you dropped the mic and walked out the room. Wow, Scott, you said that as a kid. You said that as a kid to a professional therapist. That's
Absolutely. I never had to go back.
Dude, listen, Scott, she went to therapy after that meeting. After you said that, she had to go talk to somebody. Oh my, I just got to process this for a minute. So you're out running in the snow because you're fighting with your father because he won't give you mail from your mom, and she's escaping because he's beating her. And the only thing they want to talk to you about is the scars of having a black man work for you, protect your mother. And the only thing that they could think about was the fact that how hard it must have been for you to be overshadowed in this home of this black. Oh my gosh, man! I'm glad you went off.
Live with a black man
and live, and you know what's okay. This is so interesting because I love the point that you're making. I mean, I just gotta digest this for just a minute, Scott, because we're really talking about images that we have about black fathers and black figures. You know, my sister is not practicing social work now, but she's a licensed minister. She's a social worker. She's a nonprofit executive. But she says she can remember being in court and hearing DAs and other social workers saying, well, we all know that black men don't care about their children. So there's this whole thing that we're beast-like, that we're hard on kids, that we're animalistic, that all of, animal-like, all of these things. And so for you to be in a professional counseling session and someone's really trying to deprogram you and help you escape from that scar, and the person you're living with has done things that, although you're able to forgive, perhaps you still carry it. As like all those scars aren't gone. And what society focused on was this poor white kid being raised by a black man. And this is the person who risked his reputation, his ministry, his home to run and escape to Canada to protect you and your family. That's just, sometimes the more things change, the more they stay the same, because those images of us as black fathers, in some circles, Scott, has not even changed very much. That's a powerful insight, man. That's really powerful.
Well, I think often what people don't understand. I think the African American community has a much stronger family structure, fathers and mothers,
sure,
than the white community. And I don't think the white community understands that. There's so much to be learned. I mean, the love that not only Jefferson showed me, but his 8 brothers and sisters and their families.
That was one of my questions. How they treated you like family?
They did. I was always Scotty. The ugly duckling, or the only white boy. But,
you were the white sheep of the family.
One of Jefferson's sisters lived near Seattle, which is why we went there. And her husband and all the brothers had a band called Broham. They actually just got back together in their 50s and 60s.
I love that name.
And so I went to I took a bunch of my college classmates to Fort Lewis to see Broham. And the bouncers, of course, were all black. They said, well, we can't let you in here. I said, well, I need to see my Uncle Curtis. He'll let me in, just to ask him. And so the bouncer comes back and says, it was an all-black audience, of course, at the fort. And he said, well, yeah, they want you to come up and play drums.
And so they had you perform that night?
Yeah, so my classmates came in and they were scared to death, but, they had a lot of fun. Man. But I guess the point I want to make is that it was hard for the black community, too.
Sure,
I mean,
sure.
William Frazier beat me up on the playground because of my mother.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I got home, my mother beat me because I fought with William Frazier.
Right.
I mean, they said bad things
sure
about my mother and Jefferson. But as a whole, I would say the black community was probably more open to us than the white community.
Well, and that's such an interesting phenomenon, Scott, because I think when you learn to be disenfranchised, and you probably you've witnessed this because you've done enough philanthropic work and relief work around the world, that it seems as if the people who have the least amount of worldly possessions or the most oppression seem to be the most sensitive and sympathetic towards others. And I can just remember cases of people taking folks in because they didn't have family, or they were somehow alone or abused in some way. And so it's interesting because our community is not always painted that way. I mean, to be completely honest, in the 60s, the black community did not they were not excited about interracial marriage either. And that's part of the reason why Reverend Jackson lost his church, I'm sure. But even in the midst of having some issues with that phenomenon, the ability to love for the disenfranchised or those who are pushed aside is really, really amazing. And I'm glad that you speak to that, because those are the elements of our family, Black family structure, that is still very evident. And I read ad nauseum all of these accounts of folks just saying, this is what's wrong with the Black woman, the Black family. She's chased the Black man off. It's too dysfunctional. The Black men don't care about their kids. The kids are disrespectful. And, your stepfather gave up everything for family, because that was and still is so central to our existence. And so what you're saying just underscores that. I'm curious, how has Jefferson's role in your life as a father shaped you as a father? How's it impacted how you go about fathering your daughters? You have 3 daughters, right?
Yes. Well, it has completely shaped me. I mean, first of all, I think that I learned from Jefferson that the greatest thing you can give a child or any family member is unconditional love. Mm-hmm. That if they know that you love them no matter what, then their ability to be empowered by that, to come to you when they have problems. And I think all 3 of my girls know that. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure the second thing, of course, for me was to try to not have them go through the same things I went through.
Sure.
In fact, at one point, we were all at the house, and they had been looking for mail, and they found happy birthday cards. My biological father would send a happy birthday card every few years, mm-hmm. but I never really shared them because I didn't share that part of my life when they were little.
Right.
All they knew was Jefferson and Sydney, and they said, well, why didn't you never tell us? I said, because Jefferson was my father. Mm-hmm. That's who I model after. And they understood that totally. Sure. Because I think that notion of unconditional love and being there for your child, you can do that no matter who you are. You know what I mean? No matter mm-hmm. what your circumstances are. He taught me that.
That's, I think about the work you're doing. It's not, sometimes we just think that philanthropy is a way of getting write-offs on your taxes or feeling good about yourself. But I know that you're interested in this work because you have a heart for the people who are worthy of service and who deserve to have clean water and good food and good living environment. It sounds to me, as I listen to your story, you have transitioned from this young, angry kid, and rightfully so. I mean, when you see that kind of abuse in your home, and it's secretive because outside you look like the model family, and then you have to live in that secrecy, and then you're scarred by it, and then God gives you this gift of Reverend Jefferson Jackson, and you learn unconditional love, and now you're in the business of sharing that love. So just the transition of a kid who didn't care to showing the world that you care and that you can be empathetic towards the pain and struggles of others is amazing. And I can't help but to think that that your stepfather had a hand in that transition in your heart and in your soul.
Well, of course, my book is dedicated to Jefferson, and in the book I share that Jefferson came along and saved us both, me and my mother. And one of the things that I'll never forget as a father mm-hmm. and as a human being is that Jefferson taught me how to choose the charity within, the love within every day.
So that's the subtitle of your book.
We all think that, philanthropy is just one moment in time or one gift, but it's really about every day there's going to be kids like Scott Jackson, mm-hmm. and they have to make choices about being angry or about realizing their potential and being positive, about mm-hmm. being a good father. Mm-hmm. And it's about what we do. It's about the other. It's about the other person. When I was in northern Uganda, I was in the middle of the invisible children, not unlike, Alex, the time you and I were on the West Bank with the deaf kids in the school.
Yes.
But there were thousands of children out because they were fleeing from the Lord's Liberation Army. And I felt this hand, and I reached down, and a little girl named Rose grabbed my hand, and she said, "Take me with you."
Oh.
and I think we've all got to remember that's what Jefferson taught me, is that it's what we do every day. It's how we react to difficult circumstances, to racial tensions, to hatred. It's what we do every day with that makes the difference.
It's so true. It's so true. As I listen to the story of Reverend Jefferson Jackson, I mean, it touches my heart in so many ways. Let me ask, because I can't remember this guy. Is Reverend Jackson still living?
No, he died of cancer when he was 64, very young.
Gotcha.
In 1986.
In 86, I couldn't remember that.
He was paralyzed before it was over, and it was cancer that metastasized to different parts of his body. But he, even from the bedside, the whole church would come to the cabin that he built that we lived in Sequim, and he was baptizing children the week before he died.
That's amazing. That's an amazing legacy. I'm sure you know this, Scott, but I just want to affirm it just as a friend who happens to be an African-American male and pastor as well, that for the faith leaders during that era of the late 60s who really held their tongues, they felt the injustice the way I do when I'm pulled over by the police or when I'm asked by a stewardess, should I be using the bathroom in first class, or just any of the things that I experienced. It's not that those older black men and women didn't feel it. I'm sure he absorbed it, because if he really voiced the pain at the level in which he felt it, it would put you and Sydney at risk. And that in those times, I mean, he's a grown man. He's of age in the 60s, which means he knows someone who knew someone who was lynched. I mean, Emmett Till wasn't just a foreign name or concept. We know by Brian Stevenson's work down in Alabama, in that era, they knew people. So when they say come on the porch before the street lights come on, and all the things that they did, get a receipt when you go to the store so no one thinks you're stealing, or always tell the truth because I can't protect you if you're lying. Those men and women felt that. And sometimes they prayed at night, and you and I are men of faith. They knew how to take that pain to sweet Jesus, but they felt it. They felt that pain. There's no way you could serve this country and live in it and have people call you boy or treat you like boy or call you worse. There's no way that can't chip away at your spirit. But his faith kept him at it. But as a good father and fathering figure, he absorbed a lot of that, because if he spoke out and if he responded to that in the way he could have or should have, your life and Sydney's life would have been a much different story, because he would not have been around to raise you.
No, you're right. In fact, my grandfather, Jefferson's father, was a sharecropper, and he was the first generation of a free man in his family.
Wow.
And the whole family was from Bristow, Oklahoma. And if anyone knows anything about Bristow, Oklahoma, it was one of those communities that are now featured. It wasn't featured, but communities like it were featured in the African American Museum here in our nation's capital, as those communities where black families tried to move forward with their lives after Reconstruction.
Right.
And so they absolutely were never very far away from our history.
That's so true. Wow, that is really true. Well, Scott, you have been so gracious with your time, and talking with you and hearing your story makes me realize how much time and how little time has passed since you and I had that plane ride back in 2000. I mean, back in those days, we didn't have to take our shoes off to go through to go through TSA or security. But just hearing your story, it just encourages me. I'm appreciative of Reverend Jackson because of his impact on you. The world appreciates it because you're helping to raise millions of dollars to help the world. And when you think about the awards and accolades you got after graduating from college, you could really be a self-absorbed Western white male looking out for your own good because you pulled yourself up by your bootstraps and you've survived abuse and, ran through a snowstorm and caught a plane with $20 bills sewn into a green hat. And you could really be inwardly focused And I appreciate the transformational work of grace, of God's grace, and the strength of your mother as well. I know we're talking about fathers because this is Father's Day, but the strength of your mom to leave, to stay away, to choose to live where she did rather than going back and raising you in that environment is amazing as well. But I really appreciate the example that you've set of love, of being loved, of being able to be changed, and that people who are changed, even though they were deeply wounded, can become agents of God's grace and be used to really help bring change and love to others. And talking with you today makes me realize that I miss talking with you. And I want to say right here, just publicly on a podcast, I want to be more intentional in having us keep in touch with each other, because there are things that I want to encourage you in, and there are things that I think that I can learn from you, and that perhaps there's some things we can do together. So please know that this is not the last time you've heard from me, and it will not be another 18 years before we talk.
Well, Alex, I'm very thankful for that, and I definitely want to stay connected. But I also am very thankful for what you've brought the world, and Dr. G, what you're doing with this series. And I just want to say again that Jefferson saved both my mom and me.
Yes.
And I want to thank all of the African-American fathers who are out there, because the role that you play in saving your own families and your own communities, we need you more than ever. That's
really, really, that's some powerful imagery, and I appreciate it. It's interesting, Scott. I just said I'm winding down and I'm winding back up, just like a black preacher. Just give me a few more minutes. I didn't come here to preach today, and but I'm thinking that I grew up in Madison, predominantly white. I'm sitting in a studio today, surrounded by white gentlemen who are younger than I am, and but a big part of my work is that it's not only to be a leader among African Americans. Sometimes I'm pigeonholed as an African American leader, and I'm not embarrassed to be African American and to be influential in the black community. That's part of my calling. But when I mention to people that part of my work is mentoring and developing white male leaders, people laugh because they think I'm making a joke, almost the way I laughed when you told me, yeah, I've got black family, my father. And so it's good to know that I'm not making precedent or setting precedent, that men like Reverend Jefferson Jackson have felt a call to be a father figure for folks who don't look like them. That's a very powerful image, because I think the way black men have learned to survive in the course of history, and how we have taught about manhood and strength and responsibility, we have a lot to say to society about mentoring, about leadership, about fatherhood. And we're typically called on to ask about the broken part of society, but rarely called upon to ask what we would do to fix it, what our suggestions are, and what needs to be said to some young men. I think about a lot of these angry young white men who are shooting up schools and playgrounds. I'm not trying to be overly simplistic, but they need perhaps some more black mentors and black men teaching them discipline and helping to steer them. And we're never seen as a solution for any of those kinds of scenarios. And I realize when you talk about your story, and I think about what I'm coming into as a black man who's really called to do some mentoring and shaping of younger white men or even white peers, it's just great to know that that's already been going on, but that the country has not recognized that not only have we been examples of black fathers, but our strength and our insight could really be used with white men who are really dealing with a lot of anger, a lot of displacement, and for the first time in this country, feeling hated because of their gender and their race. White men have never been challenged because they're white and male, but as black men, we have always been either feared or despised because we're male and black. And this conversation has given me a chance to really think about how I embrace that part of my work and my call more seriously. And your story about you and your stepfather, Reverend Jackson, has really helped me to really consider that role that I'm supposed to take in society. And I really appreciate you for sharing that today.
Well, you have a lot of lessons for all of us. And one of the songs that Jefferson used to sing, I won't sing it today, but I will tell you some of the words, because
sure.
It really makes me think about the way he thought about fatherhood.
Mm-hmm.
It's called I Wonder. I wonder, do you love the Lord as I do? I wonder, will you do some good each day? I wonder, will you save a child? And that's what Jefferson was all about. It was suffer not the little children, and that's the role model that all fathers need to learn how to play.
Yes. Well, Scott, I have enjoyed talking with you. This has been meaningful. It's been powerful. And I know that it's going to reverberate and resonate within the hearts of many, many, many folks who are thinking about fatherhood and who want the positive, warm stories of fatherhood, because there are so many, just like the one with you and Reverend Jefferson Jackson. So thank you for your time today. Best wishes on all the great work that you're doing around the country. And I'm looking forward to our paths crossing real soon. Thank you again for taking time to be on Black Like Me today.
Well, and thank you for your ministry.
All right, man. Take care.
Thank you for listening to today's podcast. You can find out more about Dr. Alex G's amazing work at www.alexg.com. Black Like Me is sponsored by the generosity of the Human Family Unity Foundation.